having done this for over a decade now, nothing surprises me anymore. In the beginning days, it's like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. I've had a truck driver become a designer. I've had somebody in the academic world become a machine learning professional. I've had people move from entrepreneurial positions back into corporate, from corporate into entrepreneurial, and all sorts of stories over the years.
You've gone to college, got a very respectable degree and job, but yet you're not satisfied in your current career. Something needs to change. I'm career coach Dr. Steve Oeley, host and creator of Escape the 9 to 5. I reached my late 20s, having qualified with a very respectable degree and landing a dream job on paper, yet finding myself unhappy. And I wasn't the only one. I noticed so many friends and colleagues having doubts about their career. I got curious. What makes for a meaningful career, and who are these people achieving it? How have people escaped the 9 to 5 with a smile on their face, and how have they done it? My life's mission is to help working professionals like you take the next steps in their professional lives and design a career that works for them. Having interviewed some of the most interesting career changes on the planet, top career coaches, and also diving into the career research, there are simple, proven strategies to make changes in your own career. Have you ever wished you could get some advice from other career transitioners? Not just 1 or 2 tips, but the whole process. Even better, what if you could get 10,000 hours of experience in the career transition space? Heck, if you talk to someone like that, you might be talking to an expert. Mark Langford is that expert. He started on Wall Street, worked overseas, and then came back to work in startups, has worked in 8 different industries in multiple continents over his 30-year career, and started his own businesses. He's also a career coach, having coached over 1,000 working professionals for over 10,000 hours, going through their own career transitions. And despite having a few grey hairs, he's still adapting his business to the AI landscape. Fair to say, Mark knows his shit. You'll learn how the corporate world finally got to him, how to differentiate yourself from other people when looking to change careers, and for the 10,000 hours of coaching he's done, and all the tips, tricks, and resources he's been exposed to, there's one powerful career tool that he has seen work for his clients time and time again. That tool is... But before we do that, a quick message. Thank you for being a fan of the show. If you're enjoying this show and finding it valuable for your own career, go ahead and hit the follow button on whatever app you're listening on. This helps the show in more ways than you know, and the bigger this show grows, the better experience you will get. Again, thanks for listening and enjoy this week's interview. I'm joining the conversation with Mark beginning his career story.
Well, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do in university or college at that point. And I came out and it was like, well, I could go to law school, I guess, with an English degree or whatever else like that. But then I had a conversation with a friend of the family and he was like, no, go to business school because then you have a lot more opportunities. So I actually applied to business schools right out of college and I got a deferred admission into Harvard Business School, which was pretty crazy. But I used my writing skills to get in. So the English got me into the business school. And they gave me a deferred admission, said, go work for 2 years. And at that point in time, everybody was either going to Wall Street or doing management consulting. So I went to Wall Street for 2 years and realized I hated it. I'm not a finance guy, And so for me, it was tough and it was monotonous and routine. And, I didn't get a lot out of it. It was a back office position. So it wasn't even on like a trading floor or something, which might be exciting. So being back office, everything else, I was quite happy to be done with it. Basically, I went from Wall Street to a management consulting position where they sent me all over the world with back then a VAX computer, which was the size of a suitcase. We're talking about 30 years ago. So I was traveling around doing business development in countries as far as not so far from you, but Indonesia, far from me, and, all the way South America and all over North America. So I got to travel all over the place. And then I was sent overseas to take what I was selling and productize it and bring it to the European market. So that's when I started my product management career. It was actually going from biz dev into product, and then helped the company to build different types of billing services, which then morphed into streaming services and stuff like that. So basically, I became a product expert.
Sure. So I know that the next step of your journey was to end up in that sort of startup space, but
Yes.
can you tell me what sort of led to you kind of wanting to even consider startups? Like, were you kind of like sick of the 9 to 5, or what was the story
Well,
there?
I was young and startups were all the boom back in the late 90s. So everybody was going to get rich. And I was like, oh, I'll get rich too. And so I went in 3 different startups and they all basically didn't make it. I got tons of stock options that never became worth anything. But I also started a couple of my own things along the way. So I started a business when I was in B school. I was doing a printing business on campus. And then while I was working for a startup, I bought a vitamin store and we turned it into 2 vitamin stores. I had help running it with the family. So I was kind of burning the candle at both ends in that, I worked during the day, I come home, worked on the store stuff at night, and it was killer. And so that eventually went away. I went back into the corporate world and then basically spent another decade or so there until I just got so sick of it. I said, I can't take this anymore, and stepped out. Or rather, I should say I was pushed out. I was laid off from an executive position. And I looked at around and said, I don't want to go back. And it was
Yeah.
just, that was enough.
One thing you'll gather from Mark's career is he wasn't defined by one job. He was happy trying things, going into different areas, and experiencing different careers. The theme of this week has been around treating your career like a jungle gym, not a ladder. The more you try, the more chances you'll get to discover what you like, what you're good at, and what you enjoy doing for work. While Mark did have a fairly long stint in the corporate world, he eventually realised his calling.
I was always an entrepreneur at heart. I was the kid who was selling newspapers or raking lawns or mowing lawns or painting houses. And I lost that when I went into business school, and I kind of came back to that and said, this is who I really am. And so, it's kind of embracing the entrepreneurial roots.
Yeah, it's really ironic, isn't it, that the vast majority of people that go to business school probably go because they actually, they see the entrepreneurs of the world, they possibly listen to, podcasts about
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, and they see these people achieving these great things, and yet the irony is that the corporate world is the complete opposite of entrepreneurship. Do you have any particular memories that stand out in terms of, the the corporate BS?
A lot, unfortunately, and the funny thing, like you said, is that, the entrepreneurial space is actually a lot safer than the corporate world because you could get sacked or fired at any time. I say, 2, 3 words get you, you're fired and you're gone, right? That can't happen when you own your business, which, once you learn how to make money, you always know how to do that. But, some of the stories I have is like this one guy I worked for, he was a ultra micromanager, and he used to travel a lot, so he'd do all his emails on the plane, and back then they didn't have Wi-Fi on the plane, so we'd always know when he landed because all of a sudden our emails would like all of a sudden get 80 emails each from this guy as he was typing away. And some of the emails would just be like, where's this report? TikTok. And it was like, are you kidding me? It was just constantly like this pressure to do stuff, stupid stuff too. It's like we're working on creating a system to make it functional, and they're like worried about the interface or something else like that. It's like interface doesn't matter because the back end doesn't work. And so it just got, to me, it just was like, I don't know, it was just out of touch between management and where I was. And then I became part of management, and that was no fun either. I just didn't like, always sitting on people and so forth like that. So I was done. The reason I stepped out is because I just don't take orders well. I don't play well in the sandbox well with other people. And so when somebody tells me to do something, even though I'm getting paid for it, I just felt like, oh man, it's like I'm being told to what to do again. And part of that is just the way I grew up. As a only child, a single parent family. So I had a lot of freedom growing up. And so working in the corporate world was not a good fit for who I was.
Another comment that I wanted to make is you mentioned in the corporate world, you could ironically lose your job a lot quicker than in like essentially being your own boss. But the experience in Australasia, at least in New Zealand and probably in Australia too, is actually a lot different because our government
Mm,
makes sure that people can't just be fired at the drop of a
right.
hat. Once you've, at least in New Zealand, once you've been in a job for over 90 days, it's actually extremely difficult to get rid of people. And so
Yeah.
for people looking for the cushy, safe job, particularly people that aren't prepared to work, the
Yeah.
corporate environment is the place to go. And
Right.
actually escaping the 9 to 5, being an entrepreneur, that is the risky thing to do. And that's where you have to have a level of courage.
Well, as a local hire in Germany, I know exactly what that's like because I worked in that environment as well. And it can attract people who are not as motivated as others who might be in the entrepreneurial world. And I'm a doer, right? So I'm always doing something. And so for me, just sitting on my laurels and just coasting in a corporate job it was just not for me. And I assume that most of your listeners are like that as well. It's just they're up and they want to do something because
Yes.
if they didn't, they wouldn't be listening to you, I suppose. But basically, anybody who has some fire or drive probably won't fit in that environment for long.
After 3 attempts at business, the experiment that finally paid off for Mark was coaching. He's a career coach like me, and as someone who has been in the game for a while, having coached thousands of people through career transitions, as someone who yourself might be considering a career change, what is the most common experience he hears from new clients considering leaving their 9 to 5 jobs?
The word I always hear is stuck. I feel stuck, right? Uncertain. I'm lacking confidence. A lot of people have been around, in the corporate world. It kind of beats you down a little bit sometimes, and it's like, yeah, I just don't feel confident in my skills. I don't know where they would fit, and so forth. And so all these things, people just kind of get lost, and they feel like they're on this path, and they don't know how to change the path really. So that leads them to feeling stuck.
Yes. And so then on the topic of feeling stuck, I'm imagining someone comes to you and like you have been in the corporate world for 30 years. Um, as a listener who doesn't have a coaching background,
Yeah,
you might be thinking, look, it's one thing taking like a 27-year-old who's taking action quite early in their career, but someone
yeah.
who's, potentially been stuck in the corporate world for 30, 40 years. How do you, ironically, you are that person in some ways, but how do you help other people get unstuck?
The first thing is working on mindset, right? The very first thing I do with folks is to unwind any thoughts they have that they can't do something, right? Because if there's a will, there's a way. If you could dream it, you can be it. Those kind of things. And it's absolutely true, right? So basically, getting really, really clear what they love, what they hate, what they want next, what they don't want next, what the ideal job looks like, that kind of stuff. And then really writing it out and figuring out what's practical, what skills do you have, what's feasible, because you might need to change to 6 months, or maybe you have 2 years. We figure out those kind of things. We also find out what the passions are, right? What do you really, really love to do? What would turn you on every day to get up and do? And then with the advent of AI, it's become a lot easier because now we take all of this criteria with some really good AI prompts and find stuff that might be hidden. And as of a year and a half ago, when we didn't have the AI that we do now, it was really just legwork to go out there and see which companies have what roles and then figure out what the roles look like. But now it's a lot easier because we can actually get a list of roles. We can get a list of companies or organizations, and we could go and talk to those people who work for those organizations and get an idea of what it would be like to do those types of roles.
Yeah. So I'm interested, Mark, in terms of, you've coached, it sounds like thousands of people, and all those people that you've coached, is there someone that stands out in terms of an interesting career story and what did that actually look like?
So, having done this for over a decade now, nothing surprises me anymore. In the beginning days, it's like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. I've had a truck driver become a designer. I've had somebody in the academic world become a machine learning professional. I've had people move from entrepreneurial positions back into corporate, from corporate into entrepreneurial, and all sorts of stories over the years. And it really, there's so many different stories. I have trouble picking one out, but basically, once you have the idea of what you want to do and what it looks like, then it all becomes about how you execute and create relationships, and how you network into companies and present yourself and what value you can present, what the skills are, the underlying skills that you have that are transferable, right? Because you go to an interview and they'll say, well, you've been in the sports industry or the automotive industry. What are you doing here in fashion? It's like, well, here's all the skills that I have. Here's what I can help you achieve. And they go, oh, okay. So we really take the function or the focus off of the functional knowledge or lack thereof and onto the skill set and the accomplishments that you can help somebody else bring. So using that, like I said, formula, I've seen all sorts of dramatic transformations for hundreds of people, really.
Can you think of anyone that's sort of come to you and they're in tears and they just seem like the rock bottom and like, can you think of any particular transformations
Yeah, I
that
can think
stand
of a
out?
lawyer. A lawyer, it's like billable hours, horrible long hours that they're doing and so forth. And it's like getting them out into something that was more fun for them, which was like business development for a streaming media company and using the skills that they have for selling and so forth, bringing it over there to do biz dev for something that they really enjoy doing would be one example, right? And so lawyers are a tough lot because I don't know a lot of them that really love their jobs and but they say, okay, what can I do that's either entrepreneurial or corporate that would use my skills, and that's what we work on together is to identify what that is and then what the end goal is and who we need to talk to.
Yeah, and I think you've essentially mentioned transferable skills a number of times,
Yeah,
and I know of professionals who feel particularly stuck because they see themselves as a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, and they think that they've pinpointed themselves or pigeonholed themselves into a very specific box.
yeah,
But what they don't realize, or often don't realize without the coaching and without help, is that actually that lawyer has great communication skills, handling difficult clients, even just the consistency of showing up to work. Some of the things
yeah,
you just take for granted, and being a hard worker too, but some of those things that you just take for granted in your profession, especially when you're with other like-minded professionals, you don't actually realize that you've got a skill set that is transferable to another area. So to frame it from a different perspective, I appreciate we can't go through your whole process, and there's no way that we would have the time for someone to fully understand your process in the space of a podcast interview. But if you could break how you work with people down into like 3 simple steps, how would you explain your process?
yeah, sure. So the 3 steps would be clarity, differentiation, and execution, right? So basically in the clarity, we're going to define the strengths, give some evaluation tools, what you love, what you hate, all that kind of stuff, create a short list of targets, and then create a manageable action plan. Then in the differentiation phase, we're going to create a personal brand development. What is your unique selling proposition? What value to bring? And basically, what is the problem? What are the problems you help to solve? Then we'll work on the CV, the resume, worked in LinkedIn profile, that kind of stuff. And then do some what I call next generational marketing materials, which is stuff that other people aren't doing. There's a professional profile, which is a 1-pager, tells me who you are, what you do, how you solve problems, your core competencies. There's a networking brief to help people with you with the networking. There's a 4-tier branding statement to do the elevator pitch or the different how you're going to verbally express your value proposition. There's a mind map of your skills, which is a graphical representation of everything. So what we're doing here in the differentiation phase is making you look different, right? Because I say you're coming in cattle class. If you look like everybody else, you need to look different. You need to do different things. And then the final phase is the execution, where we do an unconventional job search. I believe in a networked-based, laser-focused job search. That's what works. And you're actually targeting organizations and people within the organizations, and you're expressing your value to these people. You're creating connection with them so that they know who you are, right? And then we go through the networking techniques, how to do the interviews, and then basically cap it off with an interview presentation. So you show up with a great CV, a great LinkedIn profile, you have great interview skills, and you have interview presentation. It's just kind of all these things kind of tip the scales in your favor, and you get a lot more offers that way.
Yeah, I know we'll come back to networking a little bit later, but one thing you did mention there that I think is very valuable to mention is a lot of my listeners aren't necessarily people that are wanting, like escaping the 9 to 5 isn't so much to say, I have to quit the corporate world or I have to go and become an entrepreneur. It's about designing a career that works for you and essentially creating the conditions where you become your own boss. And I
Right.
know from the research that the better you get at whatever it is you do, you can essentially become an entrepreneur within a sort of standard job, because if you become so valuable to your employer,
Yeah.
then you can call the shots, and you're in a very powerful position to say that these are the hours I want, this is what I want to do. But the thing that you mentioned that I really wanted to talk about is that differentiation. And in a world where we've got CVs, and it's very easy nowadays to have a very nice looking CV using Canva and other tools like that. You can go on LinkedIn and make your profile look quite nice very easily. Is that differentiation piece is if you are wanting to go and do something else and you do understand what your skills are, what your transferable skills are,
Right.
how do you communicate to others in a unique way your value proposition?
Well, one of the strategies that I use is called a subject matter expert strategy, right? And you basically take literally 3 days, 8, 10 hours a day, learn everything you can about some niche within what you're truly interested in, right? I mean, you become the de facto expert by looking at all the other thought leaders, doing the research, finding out everything you can, and then you literally could become the one of the top tier people within this niche, within this industry. And then you go out there and you talk to people and you say, hey, one of the things you could do is write an article and say, I'm putting an article together for Forbes. I mean, think big, or Inc. or something else like that, or some other big magazine that you have down there, and talk to the thought leaders and then get their input and basically say, everybody likes to have their name in lights. So it's like, hey, I'm writing this article. I'll come back to you with my findings. And as you're talking to these people, you can also drop the hint like, hey, I would love to work for your company, and they're looking at your value and they're saying, oh yeah, you might be a good fit. So you're talking to decision makers or leaders while you're putting this presentation together and you're putting this article out there, and then you get exposure in the public from wherever you publish this thing, and then you could take it and use it for podcasts, what you're doing, and like I said, you become the de facto expert or something. And so you say, well, what would I be a de facto expert in? Stand in the path of progress, right? And so what's hot these days? Cryptocurrency, AI, VR, augmented reality, robotics, automation, anything like that. And then, find something within that you really enjoy and become that subject matter expert. And you either start a business with that or you work for somebody that's going to pay you big bucks because you know more than anybody else in the world, basically.
Yeah, I think that advice about becoming the expert is really good advice. And to provide a very personal context, when I started this career guidance podcast 3 years ago, I didn't have a coaching qualification. I was very new to the coaching space and was in the process of developing my own coaching program on the basis of like reading the top career books and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
I was attempting to become the expert, but it sort of comes back to that idea of faking it till you make it. It's not to bullshit and say that I've got like 20 years of experience when I don't, but you actually have to like to become the expert. You almost have to act like the expert from the very start. And
yeah.
now, as I'm putting together these podcast episodes, the expertise that I give now and the expertise that I can bring to an actual interview compared to when I started is is way different. And yes, I still have my moments of imposter syndrome, but it's far different to like 3 years ago when you're first starting and you're trying to be this career expert and you actually just don't know what you're talking about. But it's not to say that you necessarily need to be the absolute top person in your field. It's just to find something that you're interested in and try and get really specific on a niche, because the more specific you can get, I think, the more likely you can make yourself the subject matter expert in that area.
I agree. And I would also add to that something you're interested in, and there's a need out there for it, right? You could become an expert at something and there's absolutely no need. And so nobody's going to pay you for it. So it's like, you got to be passionate about it. The world has to need it. You have to love it and you have to get paid well for it.
But also don't underestimate what the world needs too. Like, I was actually literally talking to some friends about this just the other day. A friend of mine shared a comedy video of these. So there was this guy that did cricket parodies. He used to do parodies of sports commentators.
Yeah.
Now there's people online making a parody of that parody, making money. So as I said to them, they're making money making a parody of another person's parody of sports commentators who are commentating on an imaginary game people would pay to watch. And I guess my point there with that story is the only thing getting in the way of you doing something is your imagination. And yes, within the confines of reality, maybe there are things that people are absolutely not going to pay you to do. I was thinking of some things that might be a bit inappropriate for a podcast conversation, but you'll be surprised. Like, if you're interested in something and there's 8 billion people on the planet, there's probably going to be at least 1,000, if not 10,000 people interested in your particular thing. And so don't underestimate what people are prepared to show an interest in and even prepared to pay for.
Absolutely agree with you. And, with regard to what we do, all you have to do is be a step or two ahead of somebody else, and they will pay you for that shortcut as well. So, again, once you have that knowledge, maybe not with an entertainment making a parody of parody, but when you're providing true knowledge or value, basically, if you have something that, again, you're a step or two of somebody else, they want that, you have it. And so they're willing to pay for it. Right. So as a career coach, what I help people to do is, they want that clarity. They want that certainty. They want the differentiation and so forth like that. So I've done all that and they haven't, and, once they get knowledgeable out after they've worked with my program, they're as knowledgeable or close to as knowledgeable as I am. So we close that gap and they pay me for that. Right. And so basically that's the other thing I would say is if you can provide knowledge that somebody else wants and is willing to pay for, it's a good business.
Yes. And
Or a
again,
profit.
and also don't underestimate what people will see as valuable. Like I know people making very, very good money just teaching. I literally got coaching, paid quite a bit of money for a short communications coaching program.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to put an exact money value on it. But I was listening back to a podcast recording from a couple of years ago
Yeah.
compared to now. And I was just like, wow, my voice is so much better. My communication is so much better than it
Yeah.
was 2 years ago. And
Yeah.
so again, not to underestimate, what you can make money from. This sort of expert chat has been really good advice. But a sort of closing tradition on this podcast is if you were to go back in time to 25-year-old you, what advice would you give them for their career?
Invest in Apple. Buy Bitcoin, right? That's where you don't have to work. Aside from that, I would say networking, right? It is the old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So true, right? And once you have a really good network, you will never be without a job. And I know that for a fact because I've grown my network. And now I can literally call somebody up, Steve, at the end of this podcast, and I would probably be reemployed in 6 weeks, even though I'm old and I haven't been employed in the corporate world for a decade. I can still get somebody to refer me in. And in fact, this just happened today. My son, who's just turned 23, he didn't go to college, and he's been interviewing. He must have had like 40 interviews, right? And he showed up. I worked with him on interview skills. He talked to a friend. He says, "Yeah, I'm looking for a job." He goes, "Oh, I know somebody at the steakhouse down there." He said, put the good word in. He puts the good word in. The guy my son gets an interview today, gets the job like that, just by the referral, but who he knew, right?
Yes.
And so what you want to do early in your life is figure out who the shaker movers are, attach your wagon to the rising stars, and trust me, they'll take you along too, and you'll become a rising star yourself. So basically, I would spend most of my time, if I was looking for something new, 80% of my time networking and talking to people, because there's magic in conversations, right? Basically, you can find a need. You can also address any resistances or doubts that they have about you. You can schedule follow-up appointments. You can give your pitch better. And so basically, when you have a one-on-one conversation with somebody, that's where stuff happens. And you find out new stuff. Oh, I don't know anything, but my buddy here knows somebody, right? And you can get referrals and so forth. So you want to be talking to everybody all the time. And in fact, there's a book. It's actually sitting right here. It's called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. This book has all these tactical things that you can do, like so that you are never not networking, right? So that you're always talking to somebody, and you put those people in your immediate connections, and then you keep them warm. You give to them, right? You give back and you provide value, and then when time comes, when you need something, they're willing to help you.
Yes, and I'm asking this question on behalf of the people that think of networking in the context of American Psycho, where Christian Bale hands out business cards to all those other psychopathic corporate warriors.
Yeah.
How do you authentic in a way that's how do you network in a way that's authentic to you?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Networking has this negative connotation where it's just that you're sending it's not that at all. It's creating relationships, right? And I mean, even going to some sort of holiday dinner and talking to a long lost uncle and just asking about themselves and their profession and getting their advice and so forth, and say, hey, do you know anybody? and basically, what you're doing is you're finding their expertise, you're making them feel like a guru, and they're helping you, because everybody likes to help other people, right? So at the end of the day, it's, if you just listen and you ask good questions, you're going to find out a lot. And that person themselves may not be able to help you, but they probably have somebody in their network who can. And so that's up to you to get that by asking the right questions. And the person who asks the questions is controlling the conversation. So basically, you just go in and say, okay, what would I want to know? and it's amazing, because I mean, even your hairdresser, your barber might have a brother-in-law who works in the area that you want to be in, right? And you're saying, oh, the hairdresser's not going to know any, but of course they do, right? Yeah.
and that's just showing genuine curiosity. And I think that's, to me, that's the advice that I always give to people is it's genuine curiosity. So if you're talking to someone and they start talking about their job as a corporate lawyer and you're just bored to tears or just not interested in all, you're not going to really be able to authentically network in that situation. Or the only way to, or this is my opinion on it anyway, is the only way to authentically network in that situation is to find something where you actually have commonality. And that's so, right. For example, right. I'm thinking, in New Zealand, cricket is a popular summer sport, and you happen to see that this lawyer has got a picture of a famous cricketer on the wall, and it turns out you start talking about cricket. Next thing, he's like, oh, I've actually got an extra ticket to this game, and you go with him and his buddies, and you're meeting someone who you genuinely actually are interested in their careers. It's not to say that someone with not that much career related to you can't network with them, but you've got to find that thing that you're authentically interested in. Otherwise, you're genuinely not going to be authentic.
Exactly. So that's a big part of it, is being authentically interested, right? You don't talk about something. If you're not interested in cricket, you're not going to talk about cricket. But if you are interested in motocross and they mention something, you'll talk about that. So yes, finding mutual interest and curiosity, you're absolutely right. I think the theme of all of this, Steve, is that it's about relationships, right? At the end of the day, we're creating relationships, we're nurturing those relationships. And that's actually what's going to get you what you want to go, because it takes a village. It's nice to think that you could do it on your own, but you need a lot of people. If you're launching your own business or getting your next job, it's the people who are going to help you.
That was expert career coach Mark Langford. You can find out more about Mark at c-synergy.com. He also has a masterclass on career coaching on udemy.com. This week is all about approaching your career as a jungle gym, not a ladder. And you can see from people like Mark, it really doesn't hurt your career to try different things, or even different industries. 3 tips from Mark. 1. Clarity. Become really clear on who you are, particularly your strengths. This is something we'll be focusing on next week. What are your super strengths? The things that make you uniquely good. 2. Differentiation. Find ways to differentiate yourself from the crowd. What is your unique selling position? What value are you providing to the world? 2. Differentiation. Find ways to differentiate yourself from the crowd. What is your unique selling position? What value are you providing to the world? 3. Execution. Search for jobs, but not in the way you were taught. Go out and do laser-focused networking. Network with people and organisations that are relevant to you and demonstrate value to them. As Mark says, and I would agree, networking is the most powerful career tool you have in your career, and every interaction is an opportunity to network, as long as you do it in an authentic way. This week's challenge? Turn every conversation into a networking opportunity.
Challenge accepted.
How? Listen. Actually listen, and show genuine curiosity to what the person is saying. Steer the conversation towards things you're genuinely interested in. And also slip into the conversation you're looking to make changes in your career. You'll be surprised at the impact this will have on your life. So this week, turn every conversation into a networking opportunity.
Challenge accepted.
Thanks for listening to Escape the 9 to 5. As I mentioned before, if you're enjoying the show, please go ahead and hit the like or follow button on whatever app you're listening on. This helps the show in more ways than you know, and the bigger the show grows, the better experience you'll get. I'm Dr. Steve O'Leary, your host, and thanks for being part of our movement. See you next time.